How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And I have to say, this interview has been many years in the making. And I'll explain why here in a little bit. But before I do, I'm going to let my wonderful guest introduce himself, even though I don't think he needs to. But just in case you don't know who this is Joe Quesada. So, how are you, Joe?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great, Omar. By the way, Omar, should I just call you Uncanny
No,
or
don't do that.
Omar or just Uncanny Omar? Just
Omar is fine. Omar is fine.
Awesome.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate the time.
Listen, I'm incredibly flattered. You know, you've got one of the best YouTube channels out there when it comes to comic books, and the fact that you asked me to come on, you know, I jumped at the chance. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the gift of amazing comics. That was really cool. I did not know what to expect when we opened it up on the short. We did a little TikTok too. I wasn't expecting this new comic book, but very cool.
Mm-hmm.
For those people that are not familiar with you, even though I think most people have probably seen your work out there, how would you describe yourself? You have done so much in the industry. It's insane.
I describe very simply. I make stuff up for a living, and I get paid for it. That's it. That's all I do.
That's all you do.
I make, or my job is what I used to get in trouble in school for doing. So, you know, which is staring out the window, daydreaming, you know, and just making up, you know, ridiculous stories. I mean, that's in grammar school. I used to hate this in grammar school, and then I've grown to love it over time. I had fourth, fifth, sixth grade. I had the same teacher, Mrs. Dorothy Cohen, and I loved her to bits because she was just so instrumental in inspiring the creative aspect of my life. But she nicknamed me Luna because there were so many times that I would just be like, you know, in the middle of math class, I'm like, Luna. Oh, sorry. So, you know, the kids in my class started calling me Luna, and I viewed it as a taunt. And now today, I view it as a badge of honor. So.
That's what got you a whole career. I know I told you a little bit before we got started, but I don't think I expressed exactly how much of an impact you've had in my love of comics. And that comes from, I remember wanting to break into comics and becoming a comic book artist because I fell in love with your artwork in the Ray all the way back in the early 90s. Yeah. And I was like, wow, this guy, and your name was Quesada. And I was like, this is amazing. So I left comics, for a while. I went to college and made a mistake and got married. And then when that marriage was ending, I was coming back to comics. And I feel like when I saw your name in these projects, like the Marvel Knights stuff that you were doing, and, you know, taking chances a lot with Brian Michael Bendis on Ultimate Spider-Man and then eventually New Avengers, it was kind of a staple of what you were doing. I was like, how did this guy that drew the Ray become like this person at Marvel Comics? That
I ask myself that question every day.
Man,
every day. But how did I go from there? You know, if you were to pull me off the streets of Queens playing stickball and say, you know, someday you're gonna have Stan Lee's job, I would have been, get the F out of here.
Well, it was interesting for somebody like me that hadn't gone, I've been gone out of comics. So coming back, I was like, wow, Joe really took the right steps. Because I think as I was leaving comics, you and Jimmy had started the
Event Comics.
Yeah, you guys were doing your own thing with Ash, and I love that. That's one of my favorite books too. Cool. And we can talk a little bit about what the next thing is for Zoop that's going on. But when I was leaving comics, I remember that you were doing that, and then I come back and you're exclusive to Marvel. Not only are you exclusive to Marvel, but you're doing all these things that are calling the shots now. And dude, how different and how crazy was that job from going from guy that draws comics to guy that kind of runs the whole show? And when I say that runs the whole show, I'm sure there's a lot of different things a lot of different hats you had to wear.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the beginning. I mean, doing Marvel Knights was one thing, right? I mean, both Jimmy and I, we were excited to do it, but we were also, it was daunting, right? Because we'd only worked as freelance artists and had only edited our own work. So now we were in charge of editing 4 books, story-wise, and then and making sure that they were up to quality standards, at least our quality standards, and how would the audience perceive it. And, that was new territory for us. Then when I became editor in chief, that was even more daunting. It's just like, well, how do you do this editor in chief job, right? And so I just stuck to what I knew, which is just working creatively with creators and going out there and trying to bring good talent into Marvel and trying to patch up a reputation that Marvel had at that time that was not very good. It wasn't a place that creators trusted at that time, and we were in Chapter 11. So, when I was offered the job of editor in chief, I didn't say yes right away. I asked Bill Jemis, who was then our publisher, if I just needed a weekend to think about it, and my wife and I, we had a house in New Jersey, and we went out there just to camp out and for me to think about it over the weekend. And, I really wasn't sure what I was being offered, because at that point, it really felt like the best seat on the Titanic. It felt like there was, the sales were, with the exception of Marvel Knights, sales were kind of bleak, and the industry was kind of bleak. Not just at Marvel, it was everywhere. So it wasn't until one point where my wife just asked me the question, and she said, if you don't take the job, who do you think they're going to offer it to? And I said, I don't know. At which point she said, well, maybe better the devil do you feel like you could do the job? I said, yeah. Well, then just do it. And my fear was I'd be like the last editor in chief in the history of Marvel Comics, right?
Because during that time, yeah,
you're so dire. But she was right. You better, I couldn't think of anybody. She said, can you think of anybody who could do a better job than you? And in my arrogance, I said, no, I don't think so. So, unless Stan wanted to come back, it's a different story. But so I said yes, and I said yes with certain caveats, things that Marvel needed to do. So I had like a list of, I don't know, it was like 10 or 15 items that we had to do that would make us a stronger company. Mm-hmm. And when I met with Bill Jemis and to accept the job, I had my list, and he had just about everything, all the same items on his list, maybe a couple of things that were a little bit different here and there, but I'd say at least, the majority of the list, it was identical. And then we just went off and made a go of it. So, it seemed to work out. The fans seemed to respond. The thing that was really the most encouraging was that we were, we had lost so many customers, so many readers, so many fans after the comic book bust, the boom and the bust. And it felt like, okay, so we basically have lost this generation of fans that were with us, through thick and thin. So we had to rebuild the fan base. And, we made some noise. We put out some good books. We did rebuild a new fan base. But the thing that was really, really encouraging was how many lapsed readers came back. They said, I dropped Marvel, I dropped comics, period. But, I think once you're a fan, you keep your ear to the ground. You may be proof of this too in some ways, right? Where you're like, you know what? I don't know. There's nothing really exciting happening. I'm done collecting. But once you hear that there's something happening again, I think those fans come back. I mean, it was proof. They came back in droves. So we had cultivated, new fans. We brought back old fans. And, the company just got healthy and the industry got healthy. And that was, a real surprise and sort of gave me the warm fuzzies to hear from older fans that, I was out, you brought me back in. So
I think that is something very important to keep doing in an industry. I do want to talk about one of the most controversial decisions that was made here in a little bit. But before I do, holy crap, man, you guys got Kevin Smith to come in and do Daredevil. And you drew it. And I remember when my friend had that, because I was out of comics at that time. And that was when he had the single issues. I was like, Kevin Smith, the Clerks and Mallrats, and Joe Quesada, because he knew how much I love Joe Quesada's art. He's like, yeah, man, you need to check it out. It's solid, dude. It's Matt Murdock, back to the basics. It's going back. It's tying it in with Karen Page. And I was like, but I was an X-Men guy. So I waited. a little longer. I waited a little longer, and it was honestly it was New X-Men
Mhm.
and eventually Astonishing X-Men that kind of like solidified my return into comics, and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
Plus the big push for collected editions, which is what I have.
On my list.
I
That was both Bill and I knew Marvel had. I mean, Marvel was soundly getting its ass kicked by every publisher, DC, Dark Horse, Image, you name it, in terms of bookstore sales and in terms of just bookstore presence. We did not keep stock on anything. We barely collected any stuff, any of our stories, and that was one of the things that we really wanted to do was to get into that business and get into it quickly, which is one of the reasons why retailers at first protested, but then realized that there was another market out there. We started to put out. I think at that point, DC and other publishers would. I'm sorry. Can you hear that mower in the background, or is the noise dampening? We're good. Okay.
You're good. I can hear you. I can
They're
hear you.
mowing right outside my window. Um, DC and other publishers would traditionally wait. I'm kind of making this up, but they would give time between the end of a story arc and the launch of the trade of that story arc. And I want to say it was probably 4 or 6 months, maybe longer. And we changed that policy where we would launch the trade paperback probably the month after a
Mhm.
story arc ended, right?
There
And a
was
lot of retailers felt that, and rightfully so, they felt that this is going to cut into the sales of the single issues. But also at that time, Marvel wasn't really overprinting much. We were doing basically whatever was ordered, that's what we were printing. So it was hard to get some of the stock for retailers because we just didn't have it. But the trades came out, and I think what it felt like to me was that we discovered that there's really three kinds of three kinds of readers. There are people that love reading the single issues. There are people that just rather wait for the collections. And then there are the crossover people who like getting the single issues, but like having the collection so they can bag their single issues and have the collection out whenever they need to reread a story or review something and go back and check something out. Uh, so it turned out to be, one of the most profitable things we did, but it only worked because, we just got so many amazing writers and artists to come in and work on Marvel stuff at that time. Because if the quality, and that was really our focus, improve the quality of the books, and the fans will come and they'll notice. And that was really the sole goal. And then the business just took off from there.
Man, I have so many questions. I've been waiting years to have you on,
Go
and
for it.
everything you just said just kind of opens up so many different doors to where I want this interview to go. Because you said something really important in here, about the release of a collected edition trade paperback at that time, immediately after the story arc is over. Because back then, like, in the era that I grew up reading comics, the story arcs were really not really story arcs. They were like 1 or 2 issues, and of course a continuation. Sometimes there were 6 issue story arcs. But when I came back into comics, that is something that I noticed. It seemed like I know you've heard this term and everybody throws this term around, but the right for trade format that was
Mhm.
almost created during this particular time, because a writer had to write 4 to 6 issues so it could make a nice little trade paperback eventually.
Yeah.
Now, was that something that was definitely pushed by editors? Was that something like, look,
Oh
this is
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't initially at Marvel. Now keep in mind that DC in particular was kicking our ass in this department.
Mhm.
And but when we looked at the way that their stories were structured, for collected editions, right? There were 5 issue arcs, 6 issue arcs that would make good collections, or a series of 2, whatever it may be, But there was definitely a thought process behind how they were building their stories to feed that bookstore machine, the collected edition machine. So yeah, we started to, and this is one of the issues that when we went back into the Marvel back catalog, like the really old catalog, the challenge with creating trades of that stuff is that back in those days when we were really a pulp publisher, everything was about the newsstand and everything was about the cliffhanger that gets the reader to come back the following month to read that next issue of Spider-Man, right? So it was cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger. And so in a lot of ways, it was sort of a never-ending story. Sometimes you could find a logical place to cut it off and say, okay, this will make for a good trade. But that was really difficult to do because that's not how the stories were constructed. They were constructed to sell within the context of the delivery system that they had at that time, which was the newsstand. That was primarily it. In the direct market, again, I think DC really kind of led the way in this sense, and Dark Horse as well, in terms of creating single issues that led to a satisfying conclusion after 4, 5, 6 issues, but yet kept some dangling plot threads here and there that can be picked up in the following story arc. So we went from a single issue, from a single story business to a story arc business, and that's definitely something that we encouraged our writers to do during our time at Marvel.
Wait, do I have to ask this question? I think I know the answer because I've seen so much commentaries on this. But how in the world did you all get Kevin Smith to come in and write Daredevil?
Well, Kevin, man, it's such a long time ago. So Kevin had contacted me to do some artwork for, was it Mallrats?
Yeah, your cover shows up in Mallrats.
Mallrats, right? And we went out to Jersey to visit him and really hit it off with him. And we loved all the same comics. By we, I mean me and Jimmy. And then for Chasing Amy, there was the convention scene. And Kevin said, hey, man, you want to bring your events comic booth and just set it up and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, sure. So, Jimmy and I showed up at the end of that movie. We actually had some dialogue that was cut. But that's a story. Actually, that's a story you could here comes a shameless plug. So I have a Substack called Joe Quesada's Drawing the Line Somewhere. And I tell that story about the line that we had for Chasing Amy and what it was cut and why it was cut. And it's all Kevin Smith's fault. I put it all on Kevin's head on this one. But anyway, so we just became friends. And when we negotiated our Marvel Knights deal, the title that we had to have for us to do this deal was Daredevil. We made the deal contingent on getting Daredevil, which was also easy at the time because Daredevil was within, if you can imagine this, Daredevil was within 2 or 3 issues from being canceled. Daredevil was going to be canceled, which, and Punisher didn't have a book, Inhumans didn't have a book, and Black Panther didn't have a book. Those 3 books, sort of titles were not being printed by Marvel at the time. And Daredevil was about to go that way too. So when we struck the deal, all agreed, we got Daredevil. First person I called was Kevin, and he says, "Yeah, man, I'm in. Let's do it. And that was the easy part of the story, was to get him to say yes, that he's going to do it. The harder part was actually to get him to deliver because he was in the middle of filming Dogma. And again, the story, man, that's another longer story. But yeah, so it just came out of friendship, out of knowing him and feeling comfortable with each other and the opportunity because, Kevin only really, the only thing he wanted to write was like, Daredevil or Batman someday. And his surprise, no one ever called him to do. I mean, he publicly said it, and nobody at Marvel DC would call him and say, "Hey, would you like to?" And we did, and he said yes. So, sometimes all you got to do is ask.
So it was because of this friendship that got started over a cover.
Well, yeah,
that's awesome, though.
Well, the friendship gave us access to him, where I could call Kevin directly. But Jimmy and I were always floored. We're sitting there. This guy's sitting there. Before we had Marvel Knights, like he's sitting there in the press saying how much he loves Daredevil and Batman. He'd love to write a comic book someday. And I think Kevin start doing some of his own View Askew comics at that point? Well, either way, he showed that he could do it.
He was doing some things, but it wasn't like At that
Yeah,
time, he was doing, well, he did go on and do
so
right.
it was through
Narrow.
Oni Press. I think it was Oni Press,
Mhm.
but nobody called him from the Batman office or from the Daredevil office and say, "Dude, want to do something?" So that worked out really well for us. And Kevin became, to this day, when people talk about how comics um, almost died, right? I mean, look, if you listen to the internet pundits, um, and actually not even the internet pundits, since I've been in comics and probably before, there's always people in the comic book industry who are predicting the demise of the comic book industry. This is it. It's going away forever. It's going to go out of business. Um, Even when things are great, right, and the industry's profitable, there's people that are looking over their shoulder. When's the next shoe go to drop? It's gonna the industry's gonna go extinct. I've never experienced an industry where there were so many people so happy to predict its demise, and yet we're still here, right? But there were two times when our industry almost went belly up. The first one was during the Frederick Wortham hearings, seduction of the innocent and all that stuff, where comics were brought up in the congressional hearings as the main reason that there was juvenile delinquency was increasing in the United States, yada yada. That really put a damper on sales and hurt the industry in a lot of
We had
ways.
we had book burnings, and there went EC
Yeah,
Comics. It was a
yeah,
nightmare.
yeah. It was crazy, and that's where the comics code was created and all this sort of stuff. And then the second time was after the collector's boom, right, where comics were selling millions upon millions of copies, but there weren't millions upon millions of readers. It was just people buying dozens of copies of the same issue, hoping that they could then bring it back to their retailer or resell it somewhere and put their kids through college, not realizing that those books are probably worth less than the cover price that they paid for it. Because they learned the hard way when they went back to a retailer and said, "Hey, how much for this issue number one that I got?" And the retailer's like, "I don't know. I got a warehouse full of them. I'll give you a dime." Uh, so it was just speculation. And when those speculators who were not reading, they weren't reading the books, when those speculators dropped out, the bottom fell out of the industry because everybody was loaded for, all the companies were like, hell yeah, we're printing money. But it was like being the Franklin Mint, not being a publisher. So, pardon me. When those customers, hard to call them fans, hard to call them readers, because I don't know if they read those books, but they did buy tons of them. And when they went away, sales dropped precipitously. And I remember at that point, I would go up to Marvel to drop off some freelance work, and remember hearing people saying, "Well, wow, this has got to be rock bottom this month. This is about as bad as it can get. We're losing stores by the hundreds, and there weren't that many stores to begin with. And although there was some growth, but then it started to sort of peel away. And then the next month I'd be up at Marvel. It's like, well, this has to be rock bottom. We couldn't pot, and it just kept getting lower and lower and lower. So those were two times in our history where we literally almost went out of business as an industry. Um, but here we are. We've survived. Despite the naysayers, despite the pundits, we're a strong business, and like any business, we have our good years, we have our bad years, but we're strong enough, and we have people. Retailers are smart enough now, publishers are smart enough now to know exactly how to, not overextend themselves and keep the business going. It's like any other business, right? The automotive business, right? They have up years, down years, but you never sit back and go, well, I guess the car industry is out of business. It's not going to happen. People are still going to need cars. People are going to still want to read comics. They may be delivered in a different form. They may take on different genres and different shapes, but people love to read. We're still going to be here one way or another.
I think you've really have said a lot of important things in that statement, because you were there when you saw the worst of comics, and
Mhm.
also the best. Like the sales were insane in the
Yeah.
90s. Insane. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how much creators were making, but I just know it was insane how many issues were selling. I remember being a kid. Um, I was going into I was in middle school, getting ready to go into high school, and I remember the record sales of X-Men #1, and it was a
Mhm.
good. It was one of my favorite teachers. My business teacher was like, record sales don't mean anything
Yeah.
because it just means that people might be buying 20, like exactly what you said, 20
Mhm.
copies of the same book.
Yeah.
What matters is like people keep buying the book.
Yeah.
I
And
was like, it's comics, it's gonna be worth a lot of money. It's X-Men #1.
and it wasn't. And the other thing that happened is that in this in you know in this attempt to actually successful attempt for quite a while to keep up with the speculators, title count went up, right? So I forget, Marvel was producing well over 100 titles a month because they were all selling, all of them,
Mhm.
ridiculous numbers. And but also what was happening is the quality of the art was dropping, and I'm sorry, the quality of writing was just really not very good, right? A lot of those stories, if you go back to them, you may feel some comfort in your heart because of the nostalgia of it, but they're really not good stories. They really aren't, not compared to the stuff that's being produced today, or the stuff that was produced before that time period. I mean, it was really a time period. It was essentially a money grab, and again, I'm not blaming anybody for it. I kind of get it, but when once you get big companies involved in this sort of stuff and they just see, wow, if this particular title sold X amount of, then maybe we should spin this character off into 3 other titles. It's what they want, and those 3 other titles would sell like crazy. So their thought process was rewarded because they made the right move and the books are selling well. But then eventually, when it came down to the nitty gritty and just an actual readership, um, the true numbers sort of came out. And I mean, maybe I think we even lost a lot of readers too because the stuff was just not very good. And I could say that, you know, unabashedly, really, some of it was not good. And by the way, that's why when I came in as a reader, I was reading more DC stuff than Marvel stuff because DC had, literally to me, they had the best writers. Marvel had a few really good writers, but DC had like a clubhouse of like major league bats and guys who could come in and fill in jobs too, and it was just it was a really good time for them.
I've always thought like Marvel always had the characters, and I thought like DC had the
Yeah.
big event stories when I was a kid. Um,
But Marvel also focused more on the art at that point because that was the era where the hot artists you
oh
you
yeah,
you didn't have to read a book, right? Oh, it's got this new hot artist. Wizard
well,
says so,
yeah,
right?
those guys that left to go form Image, none of them came from DC.
No, and
They
and
were all
and
Marvel guys.
so Marvel was conditioned to bring in new artists and call them the next new thing, right? I mean, I was part of that. Uh,
Mhm.
thank you, you know. But if you try to read some of those books, really difficult to read because it was just all artist driven. It wasn't even as much story driven as it was artist driven. Um, it was all about the splash page, and there's a certain art and dynamics to that that I think you could certainly look back and appreciate. But in terms of being that perfect mixture of story and art, there weren't that many books like that at Marvel at the time. But DC had a lot of them.
So what do you think is so how do you think they deal with it now? Since we saw that in the 90s, you mentioned particular characters, and I'm sure some of them were probably some of my favorite characters growing up that spun out of books. But what is that lesson to learn? Because if people are buying something, whether it's a first appearance of a character, whether it's a #1,
Mhm.
how have publishers learned to just take a step back without going crazy and saying, okay, we need We
Right.
need to hammer in this character into everybody's brain. It's going to be the next thing. Let's spin it off into 2 different titles. Let's give them another mini series.
I mean, there's still a little bit of that, but that's the essence of publishing in a lot of ways, right? If something's hot, um, then people want more of it. It's like I would hear the constant complaint when I was editor in chief of like, how many more Wolverine titles do we need? And I'm like, I don't know until they stop selling.
Right.
Right? We're not
Absolutely.
just putting it out because we just want to put it out. It's because retailers want it, customers want it. That's what's selling. 1 or 2 people on the internet who are really upset about that there's so many Wolverine titles. Why aren't you publishing Squirrel Girl or whatever whatever sort of minor character instead of another Wolverine title? It's like because people forget this that Marvel's in the business. We're all in the business of making money. It's the only way that we could keep publishing is by making money. So we try to give the readers what they ask for. We don't always succeed, and I speak of I speak as the global we in terms of like the comics industry, and also I always find myself I've been in Marvel so long that when I talk to my Marvel buddies I keep saying we, and I'm like wait I'm not in Marvel anymore. I got to stop that. I love the company so much, and I love the industry so much that that I fall back to. And now I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. I got several questions, man. I've had several questions. I remember I did get to interview you once before many years ago, back in 2004, 2005. I had a podcast, but I remember it was right before the big thing at Marvel, which was Spider-Man One More Day.
Right.
And I remember the rumors that were flying around, because back then the internet, it wasn't what it is now. Like, believe it or not, the internet was forums, it was websites. You had to actually click on it or go to a favorite. You didn't go on your phone and be like, what the hell's Joe Quesada up to now? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so different now. Everybody's so connected with social media.
Yeah.
You find something out. Like back then, I mean, rumors were everywhere, but the rumors were different. So much time has passed since One More Day.
Mm-hmm.
And let me tell you, I know that when I interviewed you, I was like, man, are you guys, I was also in my 20s, are you guys really going to split up Mary Jane and Peter Parker? That's not a good idea, man. And what's really interesting is, yeah, I'm not a fan of that story. But I didn't appreciate that story until much later. It was funny. It was actually a Transformers panel that I was watching about the toys. And the guys were just, long story short, they were going on about how the best-selling toys at the time were just recycled original Transformers molds and stuff. They're like, people love seeing that. But how much longer are those people going to buy those? How much longer are people going to be nostalgic for that? They're going to be in their 50s. Do they still want to rebuy the same thing? Mm-hmm. We need to tap into the new era of Transformers buyers. So that's why we create new characters. That's why we had Bayformers. And it kind of made sense. I was like, holy crap. Because I hate Bayformers, but it doesn't matter what I don't like. What matters is that this legacy carries on to the next generation. And that's going to be nostalgia for somebody later on that grew up going with their dad to the movies to watch Bayformers. And when they're in their 30s, they're going to see a toy, like a masterpiece toy, it's $150. And they're going to be like, that reminds me of going to the movies with my dad. Best times of my life. And I think it finally clicked with me that I was like, well, it did relaunch Spider-Man for a new era. And I have no idea what the sales were, right? I didn't keep up with that stuff afterwards. But it took me that long to realize why it had to be done. Because, I mean, DC does the whole reboot. Like, Marvel really proud itself in the fact that we're not rebooting any of our characters. It's the same character you've been reading about since 1961 or 1963, whenever the characters first appeared. And DC is like, we're doing, and it's kind of become a joke nowadays where like every 5 years, like, we're rebooting the thing. Even fans are like, well, sales are tanking. I guess we're going to reboot the universe. But it was different at Marvel. This was the first of its kind, even though it wasn't like a total reboot.
Yeah, no, we took great pains not to make it a reboot, right? That was the tough thing. Is like, the stuff that I would hear as the story was going on, from people like, Quesada hates marriage. He's in a terrible marriage himself. That's why. I'm like, no, none of that's true, right? There were,
you got all kinds of crap, man.
Let me just bookend this really quickly, right? These days, it's so many people that come up to me and hand me that book or that collection, and they lean in like it's like a drug deal or something. It's like, I really love this story, right?
They don't want nobody to know. They don't want anybody to know.
It's almost like they're going to get canceled because of some internet folks that what has it been, 16, 15 years already, who are still kind of hung up on this thing, right?
18 or something.
I remember running into Tom DeFalco because prior to this, right, it was the Clone Saga. It was the most hated thing in Spider-Man history. And I remember telling Tom, saying to him, "You're off the hook, buddy."
Yeah, you were literally hold my beer.
So, but it's to talk about this again. There are several layers to this story and the reasons why we did this. And I talked about them ad nauseum online with fans, and literally one-on-one with fans, to the point where I'm just exhausted about it. But what the hell, we could talk about it. There's certain things within a character's DNA when they were created that make them as strong a character as they are, right? So for those people that feel like, I hate marriage, I don't like marriage, no, it's not true, right? For example, the Fantastic Four, right? The core of that book, the core of the Fantastic Four, it's not about the superpowers. It's not about, the cosmic fantasy. It's about a family. At its core, it's about its family. One of the greatest things I think that I thought was done to Fantastic Four was an Ultimate Fantastic Four, where Mark Miller started to introduce more family into the family, right? Was it Reed's mom that he introduced? Somebody he introduced an older family member that came in, and I'm like, that's the way to do it, right? That's how you take something and just sort of add some spice to it, but you're still dealing with the core DNA of what makes that particular title different than anything else, right? We all talk about the great scenes where the Fantastic Four are at home and making dinner or whatever it may be, and they're using their powers to do it, right? That's what makes it so cool. Spider-Man was always written and always designed to be a young man in his 20s. And maybe, he's probably close to 30, right? We started to age him, which was a mistake to begin with. And then we married him, which was a huge mistake. And this has nothing to, this is not my opinion on marriage. It's just my opinion on storytelling. And it wasn't just my opinion, because again, I would go up to Marvel, days, and I can't begin to tell you how many editor-in-chiefs I'd hear lament the fact that Peter Parker is married, because it cuts him off from so many interesting stories. And the only way, let's look at Spider-Man as our Mickey Mouse, right? The only way you can bring any tension into that relationship, because if that relationship is just happy-go-lucky and it's not going to read as realistic, and people are going to get bored of it. And Spider-Man is all about soap opera. So the only way relationship is by either making Peter cruel or Mary Jane cruel, right? You can't introduce another love interest, because now it's a whole different thing. You wouldn't do that with Mickey Mouse. So we have to be very, very careful with how we handle Peter, and we mishandled him at one point. So do you know how the whole marriage thing happened? The whole history behind it? I'm gonna say you don't.
Do you mean the behind the scenes of why it had to happen?
Why he got married? Yeah, why they married him in the first place?
I think they have to beat somebody to do.
Yeah, that'd be Stan Lee. So
Yeah.
Stan was writing the Daily Strip.
Yeah, that's what it is,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then and it wasn't doing very well, right? It had dropped in popularity. So they contacted Stan and said, "Listen, we're gonna need to cancel the strip unless there's something you could do to spike it," right? So Stan's thinking, well, this strip is out of continuity, right? It's not part of the comic continuity. I'm going to marry Peter Parker off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this got some immediate. And so Jim Shooter, who was editor at Marvel at that time, saw this and said, I'll be damned if I'm going to let Stan beat us to the punch. So keep in mind, Peter Parker and Mary Jane had already split up. They've been split up for quite a while in the books. So in the span of 2 issues, they brought Mary Jane back and they got married, right? Talk about a stunt,
Mm-hmm.
and they've regretted it ever since. They had tons of press and tons of, immediate, and it made the older fans happy because now Peter Parker, a lot of these fans got into Spider-Man when they were young, like Peter Parker, and now they were growing older and getting married and having kids, and so is Peter Parker. But at what point do you stop doing that, right? At what point these characters aren't necessarily meant to age in real time? So at what point do you stop doing that and say, well, by this point, Peter Parker, should be in an old age home? And we had to keep in mind the kids that were going to be getting into comics today and tomorrow, and which Peter Parker did we want them to experience? Which one did we want them to see for the first time? Because a married Peter Parker is their dad. If we had killed off Mary Jane, well, being a widower to a kid feels even older. So, and we also didn't want to kill off a great character. And to be straightforward, I didn't split up Mary Jane and Peter Parker. I always said they could always get back together again. They could always date. And, in terms of retroactively changing anything in continuity, the only thing that was changed was they were going to get married, and Peter wasn't able to make it to the altar in time because he had gotten into an altercation with, some bad guy and got his ass kicked, and he missed the wedding. But then everything else from that point on continued. The stories in which they were cohabitating and married still existed. They just weren't married, but they were still cohabitating. And I go back to, I'm paraphrasing here, but there's a Chris Rock special where he talks about how the story of him as a single man are much better stories than the story of him as a married man. He's like, if you're doing it right? If you're doing the marriage thing right, you are boring as shit. And it's the truth. So and we did. There was a trend where, writers would end up, writing Mary Jane like a constantly bickering harp. It didn't reflect great on the Mary Jane character. It just didn't reflect great on women in general. It was just a way to try to bring some tension into a story. But all those, everybody remembers the Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane, that triangle, like who's he gonna pick? Can't do that stuff, right? Once you have a married character. So we had to figure out a way. Let me correct that. We didn't have to, but I had, since I've been in comics, I'd heard about, God, I wish we could unmarry them somehow. And at that point, we were doing so well that I felt, you know what? I think I've earned enough cred in the fan community that I know people will hate me for this, but I think we need to pull the plug and figure out exactly how to bring him back to being a single character. And the other thing about this is if you look at any incarnation of Spider-Man in the movies, in animated shows and stuff, he's a single dude. They may wink at the wedding stuff, but they don't go there because they know it changes the character inherently. It starts to age him. And, Spider-Man is, he's the moneymaker when it comes to retail, kids wearing those costumes, kids playing with the toys, all that sort of stuff. He is probably our best character for attracting a younger audience. And here we are aging him by the issue. So it felt like it was an important thing to do. And it's proven out. Because Spider-Man stories, I think, ended up becoming much more interesting, and much, again, sales were good. The character never went extinct as people predicted. So while people may not like the execution, and that it's fair to say if you don't like it, not every story is, going to be everybody's favorite story. But I do get the whispered people who come and say, but
Wait,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I've never heard you say these things. I've seen interviews before. I've read interviews with you. It's interesting hearing you say it.
Mhm.
Because I think back of that formula of like sitcoms and comedies, like whenever they hook up two characters together, the will they, won't they characters. And once that happens, it's like they lose kind of story arcs. Because once that will they, won't they is gone, it seems like the mystery isn't there, right? Like, so I wonder if that's why sometimes they wait too long, and then that's why sitcoms end up just eventually ending because there's just not much more stories to tell. You mentioned something about happily ever after too. I just wanted to know, like, you were not writing the book at the time, but it was J. Michael Straczynski.
Mhm.
So was there any pushback then from anybody that was like, we can't do this?
We came up with, everybody in the sort of Marvel writers core, right? Our top writers. The marriage did not make good Spider-Man stories, right? Proof of this was just how much fun Bendis was having with Ultimate Spider-Man, right? But here we had the main character, our main universe character, sort of stuck in this pause from a story potential of all the things that we can do. So we had, I'd say maybe about 2 or 3 phone calls with, all our biggest writers at that time, trying to figure out a methodology by which to do this. And, we came up with it, right? It wasn't just my idea, we came up with something that affected as little of continuity as possible. We wanted to make sure that, that your Spider-Man number 98, Amazing Spider-Man 98 was still in the same time. It just that we didn't screw it up, so that making those stories worthless. So, during that conversation, I said, look, I'm going to draw this thing and I'm going to write this thing because, you guys are freelancers, I'm in chief, I could do this and blah, blah, blah. And, I could take the bullet. And Joe said, no, I want to write it. I'm like, Joe, this is a poison chalice. I said, no, I want to write it.
Who said that it was a poison chalice?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I knew that there was going to be a segment of fandom that was just going to go, where's my married Peter Parker? Where's the Spider-Man that I can relate to as a married dad? So, and I think also that a lot of it was just a piling on in a lot of ways, which is fine. It shows just how passionate fans are about this character. The worst reaction would have been nobody caring. That would have been worse.
Well, I was gonna say, going back to what I said, I have no idea what the numbers were like after you guys relaunched it. I don't know if the sales were great. I assume the worst reaction would have been like, nobody's buying Spider-Man, which is
the worst reaction would have been, as people predicted wrongly, that that's it, Spider-Man's getting canceled. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. It wasn't close. So, and again, you can't drive, while people look at the internet as a powerful tool, and it can be, you can't necessarily your stories, base your business plan or anything on the internet, because it's not the real world. There's a lot of people that enjoy what we're doing or don't enjoy what we're doing. I say we again, it's the collective we, industry-wise.
I got you.
Who don't have the time to vent online, right? I have lots of stories that I read. I'm really, that's a really good story, and but I just don't post, and I probably wouldn't as a fan either.
So I do think it's harder to post for things that you enjoy, though, than it is for things that you don't like, because it's that it definitely clicks on something in you, right? I mean, whether
Right.
it's a bad restaurant, you want to go and leave a bad, you're mad, you're typing at the keyboard like, I can't believe I got food poisoning.
Yeah.
But how much harder is it to go, man, that was a good restaurant.
Yeah, people will never tell you, you know. But I also think that, you know, if you went by the internet, right, Marvel would be the worst selling comic book company on the planet, right? If you just judged the business by what's being said on the internet. I think it's easy to gripe when you're kind of anonymous and you're, you know, so I just, you know, again, it's to me, it's not necessarily the real world or indicative of the real world. What's indicative of the real world to me is sales, plain and simple, right? You could be the most talked about comic, or the most talked about creator, or literally have hundreds of thousands of followers on whatever platform, and still you won't be able to sell a single issue if the story isn't good. And I've seen this happen where it says, well, this person's got hundreds of thousands of followers, but they really can't sell that many units. What's going on? Well, you know, people will read the stuff for free, but when it comes to driving to the register, maybe it's not compelling enough. And really, that's our job as artists, as writers, as publishers. It's to bring that person to the register, right? And it's not an easy job. So, you know, you get a customer who walks into a shop and they look at that giant comic rack, or I used to call it the pizza pie with everything on it, right?
Mhm.
And you have to decide, you know, if you're a regular reader, well, you pick up your regular titles. Maybe you have enough disposable income to maybe pick up one or two new things. So the first thing that attracts you is probably the cover or the title, and you'll page through it. And then you'll either put it back on the shelf, or maybe it looks interesting enough that you'll take it, you know, halfway to the register, you'll think about it. And then if you put it down in front of the register and you take your wallet out and, you know, you plop down your, you know, hard-earned money that you worked your ass off to make all week long, that, you know, that's the hard part for creators. That's the part that we have to really achieve, and for publishers, to get people to part with their money for what we're giving them. And hopefully what we're giving them is something of quality that then they come back and say, oh, I'm going to add that to my regular sort of title list. But the internet doesn't give you that. The internet will give you probably, I'd say 85% of it's mostly the negatives about your title. And your title could be selling through the roof and you're still going to get this. So I encourage people not to necessarily judge anything by the internet, because, you know, it's generally, you know, 5 angry people that end up sounding like 1,000. You know,
I had a really good friend of mine who passed away last year, and he was the old guard, and he was like, yeah, man, these internet trolls had no idea what it was like to be angry. Back in the day when you got pissed off at a comic creator, you put a damn stamp on it and you walked to the post office and you deliver. Now that's anger. Nowadays,
but you know what? But there's a certain element of, like, you know, again, when you post a negative restaurant review, right? You know, like I got a Yelp account, I think, but it's got my real name on it, right? So, you know, you're posting as a real person. You know, you don't know who's saying these negative things. You don't know if they've even read what you've published. It could just simply be, you know, oh, I want to jump on this bandwagon because I heard this creator's a dick or something. I don't know. And at the same time, I think creators need to be more cognizant of their fan base and the fact that their fan base comes in all shapes and sizes and beliefs. And I think that's really important too. And you know, I don't understand the, you know, well, you know, if you, you know, if you don't like my politics or you don't like my views, then don't buy my work. It's like, I don't know, man. I want everybody to buy my work. I don't want to sit here and, you know, necessarily, you know,
I think
I'd never say that.
I think social media has really given everybody a platform to believe that they are probably more important than they really think, or they are, like, in reality, right? Like, I have a voice. Here's my voice. I want to share it with people. and the more likes and all that, but that's, I mean, we're talking about social media, which is something I completely don't understand either, because I don't really social media at all. And sometimes I'm kind of glad I don't. Now, of course, I'm so behind on everything that's going on because I don't social media, but I don't get spoiled on things like Deadpool and Wolverine.
Right.
So there is a
It's
plus.
just, yeah, I mean, you have to assume, I will assume that 50% of the audience doesn't necessarily believe in everything that I believe in, one way or another, right? Politics,
Sure.
religion, social issues, whatever it may be. I've got my views, and they're my views. But as someone who wants to um, sell comics, and have readers enjoy my work, this world is so polarized these days that if someone feels that my views aren't their views, they may just not, or not even that so much. But if I'm attacking them for their views, they're not going to read my work, or they're not going to purchase my work. And I'm sorry, everybody's welcome, in so many ways. And there are places where I draw the line, but I just think it's you're defeating yourself when you get too much on your sort of your and everybody's, by the way, it's a free country, you're free to say whatever you want. But if you're someone who's a freelancer, who is a singular talent, and you want to appeal to the widest audience, right? Appeal to the widest audience. I look at somebody like Hugh Jackman, right? Hugh Jackman is one of the most beloved actors. You don't hear anybody say anything bad about Hugh Jackman. I don't know any of Hugh's beliefs. I don't know anything about his politics. I don't know anything about his life. I mean, we know that he's gotten divorced, right? But he's kept it all.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah.
I thought he's still okay. Thanks, Joe. Spoilers.
But you know what I'm saying? He keeps it all very, very private, buttoned down, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's about the work. And I don't begrudge anybody, or for doing it their way, right? But these are just sort of my beliefs. There's a often misquoted Stan Lee saying, and to be honest with you, I don't even know if Stan actually said it, right? But people will attribute it to Stan. And the quote is, you probably heard it: "Don't give the customer what they want, give the customer what they need," right?
That's what I've heard.
There is nothing more arrogant to me than saying that, right? Because who am I to tell the customer, to say to the customer, this is what you need, right? Not what you want, what you need. And that's not what Stan said. The quote, my understanding, the quote is, don't give the customer what they want, give them what they really want, which is a wholly different thing. Because number one, it assumes that you, like the customer as a creator, you have no more of an idea of what the customer wants than the customer does until they get it. Mm-hmm. So, I'm always on my toes with that, saying, look, I think this is a great story, but I won't know until people buy it or don't buy it. And if you create something, and this is not to say that there's anything wrong with someone producing political or social commentary, comic books and stuff. That's what they are. That's what they're meant to be. But in general, when I create a story, that kind of stuff, I leave it in subtext, and I think it works better in metaphor.
Well, I think a lot of writers are like that, and the problem is that you have readers, or I don't know, maybe so-called readers that look for things.
Yeah, that's true.
And I, like, when I was a kid, dude, I couldn't tell you who was writing these stories. Like, stories were stories to me. It wasn't until I was a teenager that, well, first of all, again, the internet, my age, I didn't know what anybody looked like.
Yeah.
I thought Jim Lee and Stan Lee were related, and Jay Lee was his cousin. Like, right. I didn't know what they looked like. I had no idea until Wizard magazine came out, and they started showing like the top 10 writers. And I saw your face on there a few times, by the way. But like we weren't connected like we are now. Now everybody has a Twitter, everybody has social media, everybody can be followed. And it seems like because of that, you have a connection with a writer, and then you think you understand the way they are because of what they're posting. So then you go into their work already with the
Yeah.
mentality of like, well, this guy's an idiot. I don't agree with anything he's saying. And you see it in their work. And when I like, there are times I do so many overviews on my channel of books, and I talk about the books, and then somebody writes a comment about so and so was showing, the way that they think politically or religiously, and I'm like, dude, what are you seeing that I don't see?
Yeah.
We're talking about Batman, or
Yeah.
sometimes, of course,
Yeah,
yes,
everything's become politicized. And look, at the end of the day, I always think that the best way to express your views or tell stories that express views in general is through metaphors and allegories. I mean, I'll go back to the original, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. Right, there was so much stuff that was being said in those storylines about the world, but yet it was covered in a veneer of sci-fi. So the stories weren't overtly political or weren't overtly in your face social, with socially relevant issues and things like that. It fed it in a different way, and I always find stories like that to be even more powerful than just coming out and saying the thing. But it's a different world. It's a different world out there, and I would encourage creators, and who am I, right? At the end of the day, but I would encourage creators to just, you got a big customer base out there, a big customer base out there. Why would you want to alienate at least half of it? Even if there may be people that you wouldn't even be comfortable in a room, but if they want to buy your product, then great. You're a customer, you're a fan, love you. Buy some more.
It reminds me of my days of working at a comic book store. You had strongly opinionated people that coming from different sides, and at the end of the day, they're buying comics, and they're buying the same comics, but they would not be friends in real life. They're enjoying the same creators, or I'm sorry, the same characters and the same titles, but haven't had a chance to talk to each other. Oh man, I do need to say one thing.
Go.
Joe doesn't work at Marvel anymore.
I know.
And he's been talking about Marvel comics, and it was my fault because I went into the whole rabbit hole about One More Day and about a lot of emotions that were built up over the years. People, I mean, when as that was happening, like, were you kept away from the convention scene?
No,
so you just went. You never had a negative interaction with somebody going
all the time at conventions.
No, because of the story?
Yeah, I mean, I would do the Cup of Joe panels, and
I remember those.
They were open forums. People could just come up, and I would talk to them the same way that I'm talking to you. And some would walk away still angry. Some would walk away actually pretty satisfied with the answer. Again, not every story is going to make everybody happy, but in the end, I think the health of Spider-Man's healthier today than he was back then. And he's more in line with all the other incarnations of Spider-Man. This doesn't mean that somebody can't do a future story of old man Spider-Man and stuff like that, and it can't happen in animation. But the core character is in line with every other form of media that Marvel did at the time. So the mission itself succeeded. Some people, want to read whatever they want to read into the book. I've destroyed childhoods left and right. What can I tell you? I apologize. If the marriage destroyed you, the thing when marriage destroyed your childhood, I apologize. But then I would also say, I don't know, think back. There's probably more important things in your childhood.
Thank you for taking all those questions, and I'm just gonna mention a couple things. Thank you so much, Silhouetted Animator. I'm now just finally being able to get to the chat because this has been such an interesting conversation. Good evening, Omar, Mr. Quesada. Thank you for the super chat.
Good morning, good afternoon, Silhouetted Animator.
Dude, there's so many good questions. Because
let's go.
All right.
Rapid fire.
What is your favorite? I saw one here. What is your favorite Stan Lee interaction? Do you have any of those? You were there for a while. And I don't know how often Stan would come to the office and check.
Stan wouldn't come to the office. Stan and I would talk over the phone. Again, my favorite Stan Lee interaction. I recommend joining my Substack. By the way, my Substack is free. Joe Quesada's drawing line somewhere. I tell that story about Stan Lee. So Adam Messenger.
There you go. That's what he was asking for.
Yeah. So it's some of the best story advice that. All right, what the hell? I'm going to tell the story. It's a bit long, so I'll tell it anyway. I've told it a million times, and actually, Disney used to ask that I tell the story at some board meetings and some training meetings for employees who were trying to understand what Marvel was all about. So when we were starting Marvel Knights, like I said, it was daunting in the sense that here we are. We're now editing books, and we've been handed. Thank you, James. We were handed these characters that I grew up with, that I loved, and now we are managing their stories and their continuity, their lives, or their consistencies. Mm-hmm. So I'd gotten 4 pitches in for all 4 books. And I was feeling a little bit nervous, maybe losing a little confidence. Are these good? Are they not good? I can't tell anymore. I think they are. So I'd only met Stan up until that point, like once at a convention where I shook his hand and put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "How you doing, Joey?" It's like, "It ain't Joey. How you doing?" Right? It's the greatest moment of my life before this one. So I cold called Stan, and which I got in trouble for, by the way, but that's a story for later. And I introduced myself, and I told Stan that we were doing this line of book called Marvel Knights. And, it's my first time editing these books. And would he have time to read the pitches and just tell me what he thought of them, right? He said, "Send them over, Joey." So sent him the pitches. He gets back to me the next day, and he starts giving me little notes, but it was on each one of these stories, not changing the stories, but just stuff that was consistent. Again, I go back to the DNA of the characters, right? What makes this particular title special? Mm-hmm. Why isn't Humans different than Fantastic Four, even though they're both about families, but one is about hierarchy, right? And royalty with powers, right? And the differences between Daredevil, Panther, anyway, it was mind-blowing. And when we finished our conversation, thanks, Stan, and before I hung up, I said, "Stan, I just want to ask you one question." And literally, I asked this just as facetiously as possible. I said, "Stan, what's the formula to making a perfect Marvel character?" And he says, "I'm going to tell you, Joey." And I kid you not, there was nobody in my office with me. And I literally did one of these. Right? And I'm going to spare you the Stan Lee impersonation so I can get this a little bit quicker.
Oh, that's great, man. Yeah, got it down.
He said, Joey, imagine you see Spider-Man appears on the precipice of a building. I can't keep going with a straight face. Spider-Man appears at the precipice of a building. He's standing there in his glorious red and blue suit. It's nighttime. And he raises his hand and he whips out a ribbon of webbing. And it goes so far it disappears into the night, the concrete canyon that makes Manhattan. But it attaches to a building. And Spider-Man wraps that webbing and he jumps off the precipice of the building and he swings off into the darkness. He's like, "Pretty compelling story, isn't it, Joey?" I'm like, "Yeah, Stan." He's like, "No, it's not." I'm like, "Oh, God, okay." He's like, "It's not." He's like, "First, before anything, you have to tell me not just who's inside the suit, but what is he all about? Who does he love? Who does he not love? Who dislikes him? What are his hopes and aspirations? What are his problems? What are the things that bring him down? Give me the psychology and tell me everything about this character." Now, when he whips that webbing and he jumps off the precipice of that building, our hearts clutch, Joey, because we're inside that suit with him. And it's like a light bulb went off in my head at that point. I'm like, "Oh, I get it." So every great Spider-Man story really is just a great Peter Parker story. The Spider-Man stuff is, ancillary to it. Every great Iron Man story is really a great Tony Stark story. We just call it Iron Man because it sells better, right?
Mhm.
But if you look at the history of Marvel comics and comics in general, it's the great stories that you remember, right, are those stories that focus on Peter Parker. This is why I believe like Dan Slott was one of the most successful Spider-Man writers ever. And Dan did something during our writers' summits. Whenever he pitched a Spider-Man story, he never mentioned Spider-Man. He always would talk about, and Peter does this, and Peter does that, and Peter does this, and Peter does that. Always a focus on Peter Parker, the character. And that's what makes for the best Marvel movies at the end of the day. Is it a Steve Rogers story? Yes, he's Captain America, but is it a Steve Rogers story that's going to make us care, right? Because if not, then it's just Punch comics. And that could be fun for maybe an issue, but at the end of the day, it's it's about the character inside the suit, and that's my favorite Stan Lee story. I've told it a million times, and it's 100% true. And it just opened my mind and my eyes to everything. Like, where's I used to often say during these meetings, what's the heart of the story? And when I get to the heart of the story, I mean, what's happening to the character, right? I think one of the best stories, Spider-Man stories ever told during the marriage era was Straczynski's first arc on Spider-Man, where he introduced Morlone, where he put Peter in a situation where Peter thought for sure that he was going to die. And he has that phone call with Mary Jane, or he tries to call Mary Jane, and it's heartbreaking because but that is not a Spider-Man story. That's a Peter Parker story when it's all said and done. And again, all the best Spider-Man stories boil down to that, the Peter Parker of it all. And then Spider-Man, is Spider-Man a blessing or is it a curse? Having those powers. You could go either way with it. But yeah, that's my favorite Spider-Man story. So, okay. That was a long answer.
Then I got to ask, who had to make the call to Stan? Be like, hey, the marriage is ending. Who had to make that call to Stan Lee?
Nobody did.
Oh, so how did he find out? Because I know he did a forward. No, he did an afterward in that.
I probably called him at one point, and he was like, "Okay, that sounds great, Joey." Stan, again with Stan, he wasn't precious about this stuff, and that's the other thing. It's like if you become too precious about it, then you really can't tell good stories. You have to, the characters, you have to take them to places where they could, as far as you could bend them. You don't want to break them, right? There's that whole thing,
right.
You have to say anyway, but these characters can be stretched to certain places. But if you go too far, you do break them. So for Stan, it was all a matter of like, is it keeping within the DNA of the character? Is it going to intrigue readers and get people excited? And does the essence does the DNA of the character remain the same? And if it does, then go for it, go do it. So that I remember telling Stan, but nobody really called Stan to inform, hey, we're going to be doing this to your cat. It wasn't that kind of a thing, Gotcha. And Stan was really, really supportive of it. So,
well, I read his. I remember reading his. Even though I was upset about the whole One More Day, I remember reading Stan's outro, and I'm like, well, I guess if Stan Lee's okay with it, we'll see what happens next. So I wanted to talk about your exit from Marvel because you were there for a while.
20, if you count Marvel Knights, 22 years. Yeah,
that's insane, man. That's a long time.
It's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you were editor-in-chief for a long time too. You were there.
I was editor-in-chief for 10 years. I think I might have been there a little bit longer as editor-in-chief than Stan, or whatever. It was close, but Stan and I were there the longest as editor-in-chief.
It was a long time, and then after you decided you got moved up, right, to another position at Marvel after 2011, I think.
In year 9. I went to our publisher, Dan Buckley, who's now president, Dan Buckley. and said, I think I'm done. And, not necessarily with the company, but I think I'm done as editor in chief. And that what it really boiled down to was that, we were doing really, really well. And, my father had instilled in me something I'll never forget to this day. I mean, he was a huge baseball fan. And he always used to point at Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, for you baseball fans out there. And the way that they retired from the game, the minute that they felt their skills were slowing down or waning, they called it quits. Because, and even though they had down years their last year, they didn't continue like a lot of ball players do and play for 3 or 4 more years until, they're, a shadow of themselves. And but that said, they left at the top of their game. So we only have those memories of them at the top of the game. He's like, whatever you do, just know when it's time to leave at a good spot, unless you really need the job. And I felt like around year 9, I was at that point, where I'd done everything I wanted to do in publishing. And so I said to Dan, like, I think it's time for somebody else. And, what else you got in the company that I could do? So, they promoted me to chief creative officer, but Dan asked me to stick around as editor in chief for another year. That's the only reason that I ended up, being there as long as Stan had the job. So I had both titles for a while until we promoted Axel Alonso to editor in chief. So I was there for a long time as editor in chief, and then chief creative officer, and then what was my title finally? I don't remember, artistic director or something like that. I don't know, but it was.
Then you decided to leave.
It's again, Brian Bendis is partially responsible for this.
That guy.
It was during COVID. Okay. My daughter was about to graduate from college, and I started thinking about. I always knew in the back of my mind that at some point, I would no longer be at Marvel. Right? It's inevitable, right? It's an entertainment company, and at some point, either you're not producing what you need to produce, you're not working at the quality that you used to work at, whatever. But I was always very cognizant that day could come. So, just be aware of it. And I remember talking to Bendis and saying how much I missed those creator-owned days, when I used to do my own thing. And it's really started to hit home as I started to think about my daughter graduating and sort of going into the world, and then thinking about, the day that I'm no longer here and what have I left behind for her, right? I left behind a legacy at Marvel, which means absolutely nothing to her really in the long run, right? Okay, my dad did this at Marvel, but and I looked at my notebook of ideas that I had for characters and things that I wanted to do, and thinking, well, I keep saying mañana, 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 and then mañana's never going to come. So it was Bendis who said to me, he's like, well, let me ask you a question. Do you feel there's anything left for you to do up there? It's like you've worked in comics, TV, movies, music, animation, theme parks, video games. What haven't you touched that you'd like to do? And I'm like, there isn't anything. I've kind of played in every department. He's like, so, maybe that's your answer. And that really got me thinking about it. And I discussed this, with Dan Buckley again, during the years of COVID, and trying to find a proper exit strategy. And that was it. That's why, this is not one of those things where I'm like walking away there, F you, Marvel, It's like, what? I had a great time up there. I left stuff behind up there that'll always be up there. They treated me incredibly well. I had experiences. More importantly, my family has had experiences that they never would have had if I hadn't been part of Marvel and all the things that we did, before Disney and after Disney. So it was time. It was definitely time, and CB is Cebulski is doing a fantastic job over there. So and I honestly, well, I constantly fall into that we thing with Marvel because I'm just so accustomed to it because they're all friends of mine up there when we talk. But outside of the people, I honestly could say that I don't miss it. I don't regret it. I don't sit here and go, oh, I wish I hadn't done, but I don't sit here and go, oh man, I wish I was still at Marvel. Oh, I wish not an iota of that. And that may also be a product of COVID because as an editorial group, as a creative group, we were really, really tight. We
Yeah.
all knew each other. We all knew each other's
Well,
families.
it goes back all the way to the bullpen
Yeah,
era.
and then suddenly we're separated because of COVID, and nobody gets to see anybody. We rarely talk on, unless it's business Zoom or something. So that part of missing the people I work with, I mourned that already. I mourned that during COVID. So when I was no longer at Marvel, it felt great. Actually, it felt good the fact that I could actually, again, not because it was bad at Marvel. It just felt great to stretch out a different muscle that had been sitting there sort of dormant for so many years. Where there were a lot of meetings I couldn't take with people because I was exclusive to Marvel. There was a lot of business deals that were put in front of me that I couldn't even consider because I was exclusive to Marvel and really wanted to to do some things at Marvel that were important. So, pardon me. Um, so now I could have these meetings, and now I could do these deals if I wanted to. But ultimately, my heart was in going back to having a small little publishing company and doing my own thing and maybe publishing other people's things as we go along the road. But that's kind of that's my comfort zone right now. I don't think I have the patience or inclination at this point to work at a big company or anything like that. It's kind of nice not having somebody um, tell you, well, that idea you had, no. Now I live and breathe by the idea I had. Either it succeeds or it fails.
I think that's a great feeling. I I did not walk away, but I was in IT for 20 years of my life,
Mhm.
and doing this full time has been a blessing.
Yeah.
And just I was reminded of that career. A friend of mine texted me a couple of days ago saying, "Hey, I've got a job opening, dude. It's yours. Like, you're perfect for it. Just gotta apply." And he was like, "Here's the salary." And I
Right.
remember thinking, I showed my wife, and she was like, she didn't say anything. She knew I was like, I'm happy. Like
Yeah.
I can't go back to that life. It's
Yeah.
not me anymore. Like this is not merely
Yeah.
making what I used to make by any means, but I'm so much happier
Yeah.
and working harder, believe it or not, but so much happier than
Mhm.
that I was at that point in my life. I think it says a lot. It was the first I have to ask, was the first piece you drew once the whole Marvel thing was over? Was it something for DC? Was it a Batman piece?
Yeah. They called right away. You want to do that? I'm like,
That's
yeah.
that's
So,
awesome.
and yeah, again, it's just it's having the ability to just I would occasionally get an offer to do something that was not Marvel, right? And if I felt like if DC called, I would have had to say no automatically. But there were some things that were like, oh, this is kind of on the cusp, not competitive with Marvel. Let me see
Mhm.
if Marvel minds, right? It could be a Hasbro toy design or a box design or something like that. And I would always get it cleared and they'd be fine with it. But to have the ability to just call my shots and say, yeah, I want to do that. No, I don't want to do this. Um, and really more like it's like taking the meetings that I couldn't take in the past. Felt so
Oh,
liberating, Um, and for to that to go back to a Spider-Man metaphor here, but after being married to the same creative wife for so many years, um, and now finding myself that I could actually play the field, I'm like, that's kind of fun.
So let's talk about playing the field. What
Right.
is Amazing Comics? What's going on? What is this about?
Amazing Comics is my new imprint. And our first title is Disciple. And we are publishing through Mad Cave Studios.
I love those guys, by the way. Big
They,
fans.
they are the little company that can and will, and they're gonna be growing exponentially. They're just fantastic guys. But also Dupuis, which is a French Belgian publisher. They've been around for 101 years. They produce some of the best graphic albums, European graphic albums. And we've become basically an international imprint where our books are designed for not just a statewide audience, but a worldwide audience. And one of the things that really attracted Dupuis to this was that, I'm just sorry, folks, but I'm just not interested in superheroes right now. I kind of done that, been there, done that. And not to say that I won't do something down the road, but right now, I've got a book full of ideas and stuff that are all genre based and just things that I've wanted to do for the longest time. And now I get the opportunity to do it. So Amazing has been percolating for 2 years. Literally, I had the idea way before even leaving Marvel, because as I pointed people, if you look at my if you find it online, the post that I put up, I think I put it up on Twitter and a couple other places, where I said I was leaving Marvel. It was May of 2022.
Oh yeah, you hinted at, you used the word amazing.
Well, I said, I can assure you that whatever I do, it's going to be amazing. And I've been signing off on my Substack like that for well over the year plus that it's been going on. So it's been in the works for a very, very long time. It's just a matter of finding the right partners. And Disciple, our inaugural book, the book that I'm drawing and co-writing with my writing partner Charles Dorfman, is a take on Shakespeare's Hamlet, but a very, very different take on Shakespeare's Hamlet. Not just the genre that it takes place in, or the world that it takes place in, but also, we're taking Shakespeare. Shakespeare, he was kind of shoddy. He didn't really, pay attention to detail. We're taking Shakespeare to different places where in Hamlet, when we meet Hamlet in the play, he's already a fully formed adult. In Disciple, we get to meet him as a child in this world, and we get to experience what makes our Hamlet. So in essence, it's a prequel to the play. We touch on aspects of the play, but the other thing that is really fun for me is that we don't change the characters' names. So Hamlet is Hamlet, Gertrude is Gertrude, Fortinbras is Fort. I mean, all the characters keep their names. We play it all card up, so you understand. If you've read the plays, you'll understand the archetypes. But it's not written in the old English pentameter, whatever they called that. It's a straight up action adventure book. Some elements of horror in it, and we're creating this little world around our Hamlet character in Disciple. So I've been having a lot of fun with that, and we'll be making more announcements that I think people will find interesting. We've taken an approach that we're going to parse out the information little by little, as opposed to just here it is, here's everything that we're doing, because we've got stuff that we're doing besides this, and then having the internet news sort of chew that out, spit it out, and they're on to the next thing. So we want to do something that's a little more sustained. So at New York Comic Con, we'll be announcing another layer of this, of Amazing Comics. But this is the thing that I'm most proud of right now. I'm really happy with what we're doing, with the people that we've teamed up with, and also the approach. So my writing partner Charles, he comes from the world of screenwriting, producing movies, and that sort of stuff. But he's always been really, really intrigued with graphic novels, and it's something that he's always wanted to a world. I mean, he read them as a kid, right? And it was a world he always wanted to sort of play in. And I was introduced to Charles from a mutual friend of ours, and we just started talking about stuff. And our initial conversation was, yeah, I'm going to start this company. I mean, this is a year and a half ago. So I said, look, I'm going to start this company, Amazing Comics. And he's like, well, I have an idea for a graphic novel. Would you be interested in publishing it? It started out as a treatment for a movie, but I think it would make a great graphic novel. I said, let me see it. Right. So at best at that point, my intention was, if this is good, then maybe it's something that Amazing can publish, and I'll find if Charles doesn't want to write the comic, I can find somebody to co-write with him, and then find an artist for this particular thing. It'll be something in our rotation. And I read it, and it was, and he said, it's a take on Hamlet. I'm like, okay. So before reading it, I'm thinking to myself, well, it's a take on a Shakespeare play. Throw a stone in any direction, and somebody's doing a take on a Shakespeare play. So what's going to make this one different and special? And as I started to read it, it was very, very good. It was, again, it was this sort of heightened reality, sort of mobster kind of thing. But I was trying to find that thing that would put it over the top. So I had a Zoom call scheduled with Charles a few days later. So I reread it again. And then in rereading it, I was struck with an idea that made the hairs at the back of my neck stand up. And I know to follow that feeling when I have it. So as I got on the Zoom with Charles, I said, look, I have some notes on how to, what would make this a solid graphic novel. But I have another idea. And if you like this idea, then I think we should be partners. And I'd love to draw it. And we just do it together.
Now, is this guy, Charles, that you met through your mutual friend, was he a big comic book guy? Like, was he into comics?
He was earlier on in his life. You know what I mean?
But does he know the name Joe Quesada? How big of a name that is?
I don't know. I never asked him that. I just know that
really? That's so humble of you.
No, because also it was a mutual friend that introduced us. So I'm assuming,
okay, then
but it wasn't that important to me. Yeah, just like, do we like each other? Do we get along? Do we creatively?
I guess that's more important,
right? So I pitched him this idea I had, and let's do this. So we went back into we really kind of rewrote the entire thing with a lot of other things in mind. And again, I'll talk more about this at New York Comic Con.
So you will be at New York Comic Con answering some questions in the chat. Go on.
Yes, I will be at New York Comic Con, and we'll be announcing another piece of the amazing puzzle. And again, it was the kind of idea when I pitched it to Charles. I said, when the hairs went up in the back of my neck, like from that point on, I woke up every morning like in a cold sweat, thinking, this idea is so simple. Somebody's going to have it. I can't believe that nobody's done this before. So it's going to be cool. It's going to be very, very cool. I wish I could tell you more, but again, I'm good at keeping secrets, clearly.
Well, I think a tease is good, right? It keeps people engaged. Let me see. We've been going on a little bit. I got to take my wife out to dinner because she starts school tomorrow, and I forgot that I had made reservations. But Joe, I want to ask you back because you've been so amazing. No pun intended.
Yes. By the way, I'm gonna say this. So never in my lifetime would I ever assume that I could do any of the things that Stan Lee was able to do during his tenure as editor-in-chief. However, I remember when Stan would talk about the creation of Marvel and the name, and he would say, if you were a kid, would you buy a DC comic or a Marvel comic? right? And that was, that was a lot of the basis for the name, right? It was a great name, right? And it meant something, and it expressed the lifestyle. And I think with the name Amazing is the one thing I may have outdone Stan on. I'm not saying only because how often do you use the word Marvel in normal conversation unless you're talking about Marvel, right? People don't talk that way anymore. I marveled at this thing, right? You might write that, but you don't talk that way. And I can't tell you now how many conversations I'm in where people just say amazing all the time. And in my head, there's this little sort of like Bellman's ringer thing that goes ding, 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 ding every time they say it. And I think I may just get one of those. So I have it sometimes. Somebody says in the Zoom, I just hit it and go, there we go. Brand recognition. But yes, I'm sorry. So go ahead. You said something. You said amazing.
I know that you've got Amazing coming out. There's also I actually want to focus on your art, which is why I'm inviting you on again, because you've been full of just information. And one of the things I have to give you props for, and maybe it's because it's been enough time, you didn't shy away from talking about One More Day. Like, it was, you owned it, your decision. That's the way you, and at the end of the day, the sales justified it, and it continued. And to this day, I mean, we do have Ultimate Spider-Man, which I did want to ask you if you're reading, but that we can save that for the next time, because I do want to talk about your art, because there is a big art book coming out.
Yeah.
That has one of my favorite, like a lot of my favorite art from your era, which is the Ash stuff that you did for Ed Comics, you and Jimmy Palmiotti.
Yeah.
And yes, big fan of Sword of Azrael too. And I wanted to talk about those particular stories. So yeah, anytime you want to come back, I would love to have you on.
Yeah. So I'm doing this through Zoop. I
get a link here, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I love those guys. Most people go to Kickstarter but I do believe that Zoop is the future for artists. They specialize in comic art, and the sort of menu offerings that they have are pretty smart, and I think that you're going to see more and more creators leaning into Zoop, because while Kickstarter's Kickstarter, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, especially for someone like myself. It's like, I just don't have the time to worry about printing and facilitating all this stuff and taking the returns and all the sorts of. And Zoop can handle as much or as little as I want. So and plus they're really good people, and they love the medium, whereas Kickstarter, you're just one of 1,000 categories or whatever. And no slight to Kickstarter, but it's just I really want to go with the Zoop guys, because I just I've made a career out of sort of taking the left turn when everybody's turning mostly right. It served me pretty well. So
when does it go live?
I don't know. I'd have to ask Jordan. I think maybe around New York Comic Con it goes live.
I'll set that up. I'll ask him, and then
because I don't but my wife is my managing editor, so she has all the deadlines and dates and stuff. I am calendar dyslexic. There's probably a better way.
I never used the calendar until I started doing Near Mint Edition full time. Like even in my professional career, people just scheduled things and they'd show up in my calendar. I just didn't look at it. I was awful.
Anything beyond the week is abstract to me. I just
doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. Suddenly it's crawling up my back, and I'm like, oh man.
And I'm not saying that's a good way to live. It's just the way that I've done it. So I do want to have you back, and we can talk a lot more about your career, and then of course this art book, focus more on that, and then hopefully by then you can tell. Well, maybe before. Well, no, if it's before New York Comic Con, you can't say much about Amazing Comics, but definitely New York Comic Con, I definitely want to run into you and talk to you about what's going on. But if you could give any word of advice to anybody that's trying to become a writer, an artist, maybe someday an editor-in-chief, what kind of advice would you give yourself in the past, or anybody that's trying to break it in the field?
Yeah, this is an easy one, actually. It's as simple as learn your craft, but it's much more than that. So, I always use the analogy, if, I wanted to be a baseball player in the worst way possible. That's all I wanted when I was a kid. Um, and I just wasn't talented enough to be a Major League Baseball player. But in order to become a Major League Baseball player, you have to train every day. You have to be in the batting cages every day. You have to, you know, be on the field, catching flies and grounders and just learning the basic every single day without fail. So it's the same with being a writer or being an artist or anything else. I'll use artists for an example. If you want to be an artist, you need to draw every day. And I don't mean you have to draw like, comic page every day or a full cover, but you should be drawing every day. Because I know sometimes, look, if you work a day job, whatever it may be, or you're in school, and sometimes it's not the most convenient thing. But how hard can it be, right? You got pencil, maybe a sketchbook here and there, and just doodle, just draw every day. And what you'll see is that your skills will improve. And it's like, it's like putting your money in an abstract bank that actually makes interest. And it compounds upon itself, right? And the skill compounds upon itself. And that's the only trick. It's the only trick to becoming, really good at a craft. And yes, some of it's talent, but I'll be honest with you, talent is maybe 10% of it. The rest is drive and a willingness to want it so badly more than the other person. That's the absolute truth. And some people don't like necessarily hear that, but there are no shortcuts to really getting there. Learn your craft. I look back at my early stuff, and I know that people look back on it, fondly, and I look back on it, and all I see are the mistakes. I say, oh. But at the time I didn't see them, right? But that's only because I've gotten to a point where I'm more proficient at it from my skill set than I was back then, right? And keep in mind, like I always say, I've told the story before. I wasn't, I wasn't. Not only was I not I went to art school. Not only was I not the best artist in my art school, I wasn't even the best artist in my high school. There was a kid that drew pants off of me. He was fantastically talented. But for some reason, I'm here and I made it, and I don't think they did. Those that were, maybe some did, but I can't, speak too much about the college experience. But I was by far not the best illustrator in college. But I did want it. When I finally decided that I wanted to be in comics, I really wanted it. Just busted my tail.
And you strived. It's crazy. Like I said, like even in the short time that I left comics and coming back, you were already like making moves that I knew you as an artist, and coming back to comics, it was like, what is going on?
Yeah. But also it's I don't approach these things without a sense that at any moment it could just be disastrous, and not everything that there's always some self-doubt. There's always some feeling of like, oh, I hope this works, right? So I never take anything for granted. There's I'll tell you one more story. I got a bunch of them. But there was.
All right, we're gonna talk again, but you go ahead and tell me the story.
Just because I think it's important for people to hear it, because it's not. This is not specific to me. It's just specific to life in general. But there was when we started Marvel Nights, we were invited to do a signing by Kevin Eastman at the Words and Pictures Museum, and it's the one and only time where all the creators of the original core books were sitting together for one signing. All of us were there. Okay. It never happened again. And after the signing, Kevin invited us to his house for a party. which was lovely. And he's an awesome dude. And he had his home was a refurbished bank, old bank.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so there was like a mezzanine level, and I remember just going up to the mezzanine level and just sort of staring down at the party and staring down at all the creators and everybody having a good time. And I felt a tap on my back, and it was my wife Nancy, who was the managing editor. She wasn't my wife at the time, but she was the managing editor of the Marvel Knights line. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." She said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm just taking a mental picture of all of this, because you just never know. This may be as good as it ever gets. And if that is as good as it ever gets, I'm cool with that. But I want to remember this." And I've been fortunate enough to have at least 6 of those moments in my life where I just sort of stare out and say, appreciate it, enjoy it, because this may be as good as it gets. So I do approach things sometimes with a sense of just don't take anything for granted. Just be grateful for what you have. But at the end of the day, I could also say that I worked my tail off to achieve some of these things. And some of these things are just being fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. But I wouldn't be in the right place at the right time if I hadn't put in the work. So
that's a wonderful, wonderful advice. Seriously, I think a lot of people could really take note of that too, because we don't. I do it. I get caught up in the moment.
No, man.
So I'm going to take a mental image of me talking to Joe Quesada here. And remember that.
Gratitude is one of the most important things that you could really take note of in your life. The things that you're grateful for. It's really important to check in with yourself, so to speak, and just remember where you came from, what you've been doing, where are you now, and if you're not happy with the situation, it's yours to change. I didn't get into comics until I was much later in life. I mean, I was in one of these 21 or like Jay Lee, who broke in at 16. You know what I mean? I was
Joe Madureira, man. That guy was
16.
18 drawing Uncanny X-Men. Oh, I wanted to kill him when I was younger. But
he's so talented. But I broke in. I was 28 when I broke in. That's pretty late. So again, I take none of my experiences for granted. So,
well, I just want to thank you for your time, and I want to thank everybody for watching. And
Thanks,
go and check out Amazing Comics.
Yep.
And I will have Joe again sometime soon to talk about the Zoop and this big thing that's going on with his art book, and talk to him a little bit more about his knowledge in comics. It's been an amazing interview, just getting a lot of these behind the scenes stories, and you just sharing your passion and your stories with people. I know you probably get tired of telling them. You've told them so many times, but it's really cool. It's really cool to have you here.
You know what? It also goes back to another Stan Leeism. Every comic is somebody's first comic. Right? Every comic.
Hey, every story is somebody's first story. I like that.
So I often think, oh man, I've told this story a million times, but there's probably millions of people that never heard it. So if someone wants to hear the story again, I'll tell it again. But yeah. So thank you for the opportunity, man. Thank you, Uncanny Omar.
Just Omar, brother. Just Omar. Thank you, everybody. Smash that like button on the way out.